Okay, good evening. Welcome to our evening Bible study. Boy, it sounds really weird. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, we got good audio on YouTube. Okay, well, welcome to our midweek Bible study. We're looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. If you want to open up to Ecclesiastes chapter 3, we're going to deal with verses 1 through 11. A time for everything is what the class is labeled, and this is going to be part 1. Next week we'll look at part 2 of dealing with this. So if you want to go ahead and we're going to read that text, and we're going to come back and then we'll look at some points on it. So let's have a word of prayer before we continue. Our most blessed and loving Father, we're very humbled as we have this opportunity to come and to study your word. We're very blessed to be able to have this beautiful book of Ecclesiastes that we can evaluate the way that Solomon viewed life and the way that he was able to come up with his understanding and the relationship that we have with you during this life on this earth, or as Solomon would say, under the sun. We hope that we'd be able to grow wise from this study and encourage us. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so last week we looked at kind of the aspect of a life being examined. So Becky, you're joining us. We're glad to have you with us, and same with Aline. I see you. So if we've got any comments or anything, anyone else that's live with us, or concerns, would you go ahead and drop them in the comments? I can see them. So we looked at last week a life examined, and the idea of the 3 different things: pleasure, wisdom and folly, and work. These are the way that he was looking at, saying that he was trying to determine what life was about. And everything that he talks about is dealing in this world while we exist here, and a journey that as we make these experiences and we have this stuff going on around us. So these are the 3 focal points that we looked at: pleasure, the sensual, the things that sensations that we interact with, we respond with, and that they still left him without any satisfaction. And then the same with wisdom and folly. No matter how smart he got, or how ridiculous, dumb, or with folly, it had the same conclusion, that basically you ended up dying. You ended up in the same place. And it left him shallow, hollow, without something missing. There was just something there. And same with work. He talks about how all these great works that he did and all the wonderful things that he had accomplished and building, and yet even at the end of the day, when he looked around, it made him have sleepless nights, and it left him hollow. So, and that's the way we feel. Everything that we do, all these things, they're especially when it comes to the pleasures, the very basic sensations that we experience, they just build. We just have to keep having them. We can't build them up. They don't build us and take us anywhere except to experience it, and it goes away. Experience it, and it goes away. Wisdom, no matter how smart we get, there's a lot of responsibility, there's more challenges, there's just something we can't within wisdom grasp everything there is. And that's a point he's bringing out as well. And then work. So all of these, he concluded at the end of that, is that satisfaction comes from God. That's truly the only place. A life that has no connection with God is meaningless. It doesn't have the same meaning. And that's a struggle that people who don't believe in God don't understand fundamentally what their problem is. Why is it that they can't work enough? Why they can't have enough sensations to satisfy? And they're just constantly on that quest to find out. And they want to know what a purpose in life is. And one of the things that Solomon said that we see as well, and even Isaiah and then Paul, talking about, if there's really no God, then let's just eat, drink, and die. Just live for today and it'd be over, because it's nothing there. Because the satisfaction comes from the inside. It's a spiritual, it's an internal thing. And then all of those things, the pleasures, the wisdom, the things that we're doing, the work, has a whole new, beautiful satisfaction, because he said that is what God has intended. That is what he set it up. And so being right with God is profitable. Having a righteousness from God is something that's good. Now, one of the things that we see as he talks about is that all of that work And everything that we really do is in time, isn't it? It's in time, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight, is looking at time. And it's kind of a bizarre concept if you think about time. My throat's pretty dry. So let's think about time. So if I was to ask you, what is time? It's kind of a thing that drives our life, isn't it? And so it's simply time is a measurable period during when an event occurs. Now, even that sounds kind of big when you say, well, what's time? Well, time is a measurable period during which an event occurs. So we showed up at a certain moment. In time, we called it 6 o'clock. So then how long are we going to be here? Well, it depends on how long I keep going, right? So how do you measure that? We have clocks, but it's the duration. How long does this last, this experience last? When we talk about eating something, how long does it take? It's the amount when you start to the time you finish. Well, that's time. The amount of time that is used, the amount of I guess, activity or the duration. So from the start to the finish, the start to the finish. And overall, everything has something like that, doesn't it? Everything that you have. When you drove here, you started, you finished. When you came in here, you started. And then at the end of it, it's going to finish. Then you're going to get in your car, you're going to start, and you're going to drive, and you're going to finish. That event of driving, that event of the study. Then you can go even bigger. You can say, when the sun came up, it started, and it's going to finish. And so the duration of an event is what we call time. And so when Solomon is talking about it, the original word in the Hebrew was meaning more of an appointed moment. A moment. And he is really trying to emphasize God's divine order and the human and not our control of it. And so when we think about that, it's kind of different. It really, because we don't think about time, even as Christians. We think about it in the God relationship, time, but it starts with God, and it reveals and emphasizes more of His order, what He has put into place. Because when the sun came up, how did it come up? Well, the world turns. How'd the world turn? Well, because God's involved in it, right? So all of these things that we have helps to emphasize a divine order and not human control. You can't stop the sun from coming up. You can't stop from getting hungry. You can't stop time. Time is a continually evaluating. It's a certain duration of an event, a duration of event. And that's the best you can kind of look at it. Now, when we look at the Greek, because we're reading, basically, our Bibles come out of a Greek translation from Hebrew. Remember, it came primarily out of the manuscripts that were written in Greek that they took from the Hebrew. A lot of the Torah, especially like Ecclesiastes, was originally written in Hebrew. And so, but it does align the same word. So if we were to look at the Greek word in yours, in the Hebrew, they do align with, instead of kairos, and kairos is more of a moment. It's time to eat. What does that mean? That's a moment. You say so it versus chronos, which is a bigger picture of time as a whole. So it's a little bit different. So where did it start? This is what's interesting, is when people say, well, who created God? How long has God existed? How old is God? Well, you're assuming He lives in time, right? But He doesn't. And this is the mind-blowing thing for us, is that time began at creation, when moments could exist in the temporal, physical world. Remember, time is the duration of a moment, of an event. It's the duration, how long. And so before anything was brought into existence in the physical world, the stars, the planets, everything, there were no moments. See? There was no events. This was all, we're living in a very physical dimension. And in this dimension, there are events. The sun goes around, we go around the sun and all these events, superstars blow up and all these things happen. All that is because God created things. And when he created things, that's what I was saying about time actually reflects a divine order. That's you get really big on the idea, because without any of that, there's no concept of it. But everything that we live in, watching the meteor showers once a year, everything that happens, the full moon, all the moon phases, all these things are because God created a physical dimension. And when he did that, time started. And the very first verse, what does it say? In the beginning. Beginning indicates the starting of an event. And that event started creation, started everything. So that's where time starts with. So before that, like I said, there were no moments. And that's where we talk about, God existing in eternity. We've never gone there. Nobody knows what it's like. I don't know. There's just no understanding of that concept of eternity. Ecclesiastes recognizes that our life unfolds during these moments. These events unfold, and that's a duration. How long do each of these happen? From the time that we're born, going all the way through, everything unfolds. But remember, again, it's in the framework of God. But God is outside of time because he's not a part of this dimension. And again, it's kind of a heavy concept in a way. And so when he created it, we have to understand that our human existence is temporal. It's a temporary, but it's also in this dimension. And so that's time. God's perspective, that's why, when you read, a day is 1,000 years, it's not literal. Because God doesn't have a clock. God does not exist in time. And I just got something from someone this last week, going through all this stuff like that. And one of them that he brought up, trying to explain his reasoning or his theology to me, was a day to the Lord is 1,000 years. I'm like, that right away was a warning shot. Right away, when I read that and this guy's stuff that he sent to me, I was like, okay, he's taking things because he doesn't even understand what time is, because God is not in time. And so that's something. And that's why things are so different in our relationship to what we are experiencing in this. And the other thing is interesting is that time reveals the human limitations, doesn't it? We're limited. We're limited by what? Time. I mean, I could keep you pretty late, but not really. You're going to get up and eventually walk out of here, aren't you? It's limited. Time limits us. You could sit down and eat a meal, and maybe you could take as much time as you want, but not all the time. Eventually, something else is going to demand you to do something. It's limiting everything about time. What does it do? It shows the limitations, the fleetingness of it as well, that things constantly are moving. You can't stop time. We say that all the time. And so this is what he's talking about, the cycles. Time to be born, time to die. It shows that, one, we can't transcend God's sovereignty. His timing is, he controls everything. He controls time because he created it. And so even wisdom, when Solomon gets to chapter 8, one of the things in verses 6 and 7 is the idea that Even with the mouth, no matter what great wisdom you have, you can't decode all the mysteries of time. And that's something that Solomon as well. And that reminds us, that should be humbling, right? That should humble us, that we're like, when you consider he lives outside of time, that he created everything, which then created time, and then we can't stop time, we can't control time, and all the pleasure, all the things that we seek after in this world, they're controlled by who? By him. And so there's the grand plan there, grand design, that we are connected to him, and time is very useful because it does show us our limitations, that God is the one that governs it. In Acts 17, when Paul is talking to the most enlightened people of that generation, in Athens, he says, God is the one that set the boundaries in allotted periods and times. He's the one that controls it. We have no control over it all. Even Paul over in Galatians 4:4 talks about how in the fullness of time that Christ came. And what does that indicate? Fullness of time. When you say fullness of time. Oh, my throat. Yes.
I did have a question, not to back up, but I do apologize because I was referring when you was talking about the quote about the guy making it one day as it is to 1,000 years. Isn't that scripture though?
It's scripture, but it's figurative.
So Peter, it's in figurative form.
Yes, what Peter's talking about is time to God is different.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. That's in the figurative
yeah, it's
form
like,
state, like. Okay.
So to God, a day could be 1 billion years.
Yeah. Okay.
A day to God because he's outside of time. So when Peter's using that, he's using it in reference and saying that idea that, we don't know when it's going to end because a day is 1,000 years to go to the Lord. It doesn't mean, to us, 1,000 years, wow, that's forever. It'd be like saying 1 billion years.
Yeah, so it would make sense why he followed up in verse 9 as opposed to saying that's time being with God, as you're saying, it's just more or less for us to be willing to understand that we need to come to repentance, not knowing the time of empty. Okay.
Because you don't know.
You don't know.
Right?
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
No, don't. That was a good question. That was a good question. Yeah. And so the fullness of time just means that the moment has expired. It's full. And it was all in place and ready to the next time, like the last days. All these things, if you go back and kind of fire off and think about in your brain, there's all these things God is using and referencing into time. And too often we get stuck because we're inside time. God is outside of time. And so we're trying to put them together.
I was just reading in Genesis, the first chapter, verse 14. And when God was creating the earth, it said, and God said, verse 14 says, God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night. Let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. So, God was in control of all that, making the seasons and the years, and it had nothing to do with that.
So that's another beautiful passage there where, like you said, where, he says, let us set the moon and the stars and everything in order to indicate, seasons. And it's time, isn't it? If they didn't exist, we wouldn't know, would we? And if nothing materially existed, everything was non-physical, metaphysical, I guess you could say, there would be no moments, because all the moments were created around a physical dimension. The moments are created around when like this morning, going to the gym early in the morning, and there's Venus over there, right above the Organ Mountains, and you can tell the season because every morning it changes throughout the year, doesn't it? It shifts. Yeah. In the evening it shifts. But if it didn't exist, if we weren't in a physical world, there'd be no need for it. So that's the connectivity too that takes us back to God, that God created that. And then when you drill it down to your getting up in the morning, putting your how long does it take you to get dressed? How much time? You see?
Yeah.
See, everything, right?
Why,
How much time does it take to drive to work? Everything's around time.
Yeah.
And so now that's what's interesting. The way Paul does this is he brings it back. I mean, not Paul, but Solomon, and showing all these things that he's going to talk about. Now, so some of the religious or theological implications is one, like we talked about, God governs it. God's the one that governs it. And it's interesting because look at the way that redemption and God's plan intersect time. There's a time that's been set, isn't there? And all of that, again, is an interesting way of shaping salvation. Like you said, we don't know when the Lord's coming, right? Paul says you better be ready. And whenever we hear the phrase, the day of the Lord, a day, what's a day? Well, it's from the time it takes the sun to come up on one side of the horizon and go down on the other. It's just all about time again. So there is, and even scientists, there's a lot of astronomers too that look out at the universe and they go, that is design. They will admit there's design out there. You just read it in Genesis, right? Absolutely, there's a design and all of that. And that's why, when we look up at the stars, I don't know how old you were when you looked up at the stars and you went, whoa. And you just have this sinking feeling, didn't you? Overwhelming of nothingness. And you just go, oh. And you start thinking about your grandparents as they pass away or people that start dying and you go, time. And what does it do? Look to him. And so that's what's interesting. Now think about Adam and Eve. They had a different relationship with time initially because they were eternal. There's no decay in the world. Everything, there was really, other than the fact of the seasons, but when it came to salvation, it shifted, didn't it? Time shifted because then they became mortal. And so that was one of the things. So we can't control it. We can't control time, but we can be, as we would say, what? A steward. What does a steward mean? Manager. Somebody, take the time we have. Psalms 90:12, verse 12 says, "O Lord, teach us to what? Number our days." Count them. How many do you have? And we're always doing that. What's April 15th? Taxes. We everything, somebody's birthday, right? I always get caught. I got a grandson, matter of fact, got a birthday, and I keep going, oh man, it's November 5th, time's running out. It's like, so we call it procrastination sometimes. We waste time, and you can't get it back, can you? We fundamental things, like that. So it does. It's a practical reflection when we think about that. Is the Lord, even saying, teach us, the psalmist is saying, teach us to number our days, value our days for whatever days we have. And so that's kind of what, Solomon's looking at here in the chapter 3, this idea of calling for the acceptance, right? Because he says for everything there is something, right? There's always something, and we'll read them. And so you have to accept it. That's the law almost. Everything he's saying here, we're going to look at. And the other thing is it takes faith. You have to have faith. There's a level of faith that the sun's going to come up tomorrow.
That's right.
There's a certain amount of faith that, the Lord's taking care of what? Time. God's taking care of us. So it's really calling us for this acceptance and faith in him and trusting God's timing. When's he going to, does it matter? Like we talked about in Isaiah and looking at some of the global issues that were happening in their day and age. And we look at the application for us today and we look at all that's going on and we wonder, what's going on? Is the Russians going to continue to fight, in Ukraine? Are they going to cut off gas? We just get so caught up in all of this. But one thing with Isaiah, if you're watching that, is it's God's timing.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And that's what he's saying throughout that. He's saying, it's my time. I'm the puppet master. I'm the one who's controlling this. You don't. And that should put us back into our humble position again, right? And understanding that. And that's what we were talking about in 2 Corinthians 6:2, when Paul reminds us, he says, now is the day of salvation. And even people then thought, well, Paul was talking about that, the Lord was coming that day or something. No. Do you have salvation tomorrow? Not like you have it right this very moment. It's going back to being able to control what you can. Your salvation yesterday, maybe you had it or not, but it's now, in other words. And so let's read 1 through 11, and then we'll come back and take it in each one of these. There's an appointed time for everything, and there is a time for every event under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, a time to embrace and a time to shun embracing, a time to search and a time to give up as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear apart and a time to sew together, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What profit is there for the worker from which he tolls? I have seen the tasks which God has given the sons of men to occupy themselves. He has made everything appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their hearts, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning even to the end. So God, again, is the one who has set these. He has set everything. He set the moment he decided to create everything. He set the moment that he's going to end everything. He has set all of the seasons, like you read in Genesis. Everything he has set. And what's interesting is in this, we have what I call 14 pairs of opposites, right? Now, this is interesting because it's kind of a poetic device known as merism, which means you give kind of the bookshelf, you give kind of the opposite. So you give, and everything in between. So from the range from, life to death, it's everything in between. The psalmist says, from the time I get up, from the time I sit down, you know everything I've done. What does he mean? Everything you've done that day, including it. So these opposites is everything and every aspect within that is what he's dealing with. And some of these are pretty clear, but that's why I wanted to read it through, because every one of these we see and have experienced in some way or another. And they're absolute, almost law. They're going to happen, There's a time for birth and there's a time to die. A beginning of life and an end. And that is where, again, kind of that humbling part where we go, one, none of us in here got to control our birth, right? You may have been able to control others, but we're talking about your beginning of your existence was really out of your control. And the same is going to be with your death. And everything in between it, in a sense, is going to happen. It's going to have a natural flow in there. And so these, again, it's just that kind of, I think, heavy-heartedness where you just stop and think about it and you just go, you can't stop these things. A time to plant and a time to uproot what is planted. It's not only just to, growing seasons of the farm cycling, but there's also seasons in our lifetime. Growing, time to give it up. There's some day I'm going to have to give up riding my mountain bike because I'm going to have broke too many bones or something, or I'm glad they got e-bikes now. I'll be on an e-bike out there, buzzing out there, but there's a time for everything. I can't run anymore. I used to love to run. I can't run. It's time. It's done. And so even though these are kind of literal, but we see even in life these stages of growth, development, learning, rethinking old ideas, carrying out, this idea is no good. There's that time for development or the genesis of things, and there's a time to end something. And so it can be literally like the farmer, but there's a lot of stages in our lives as well, that it's time to begin something new. I'm having to deal with Medicare. That's a beginning, right? It's like, and I have to give up the old, there's a time as well. So there's these very life link, especially when you think of like a plant. A plant is something that's living, and there reaches a point that even a plant, it's over. It's time to give up on it, like that eggplant that we've got. We got an eggplant. The poor little guy finally produced one that's about that big. It ain't gonna make it. Freeze is coming. It's time. Its time's gonna be over. It never produced all summer long, got nice and big. But time's out. That's not gonna make it. And so it's gonna be time where I'm gonna have to pull it up and then start again. So when we talk about time to kill and heal, the two different ones, I don't think he's not justifying murder. There are times that we know that justice as well has to be carried out. It was a part of the Novitic or the Nova covenant. Before that, there was really no capital punishment. People miss that. But after that, if you go and look at the covenant that was made with Noah, which was mankind after the flood, was it blood for blood? That when one took one's life and took a life, then he was now going to be accountable. But there's also, and you see this, a time to heal. There's a time that we have to let it go, I guess. I think of like Jonathan, what's his name? Mephibosheth, who was a cripple. David just took over the kingdom, and he ended up a lot of judgment. There were some that were killed and removed, and everybody expected that he should have killed anybody who could inherit the kingdom and take it away from David. And Jonathan, he made a covenant promise with Jonathan, and so he went ahead and he showed kindness to him. But there reached a point, he supported him for a long time, and he spared his life. So there's opposites, vengeance and violence, and yet there's times that we have to show the compassion, the opposite side of it too. Rebuilding, demolishing and rebuilding, a time to tear things down, a time to build them up. One of the things that just, every time I read this and thinking about it today was we used to have a Catholic church here, was at downtown mall. And it was like one of the oldest buildings in the valley here. And when they renovated and modernized, they tore that building down, just demolished it. And it's almost like that song, put up a parking lot. If you go down there right now, there's an old bank building that collapsed, the business failed, and that's where they have that central area that's like a little plaza. If you go down to the farmer's market, because they've come back and they've tried to honor that church. I can't remember the name of that church, but I mean, we're talking like in the 1840s, 50s it was built. And they wanted to modernize, so they just go out and tear it down. But there are some things that need to come down. You can only do so much, and there's time as well to build. So these are cycles as well that we see, that our lives, sometimes we see that it's time to tear something apart within our lives. It is time to get rid of the old life, right? and a time to build a new one. As a Christian, we can see that. There's a time for sorrow and joy, right? And it's a cycle that we can't stop. I remember one of the very profound thoughts I had when my father was killed. Somebody asked me, he said, well, how did you handle it? And I thought, well, he's not going to be the last one. Eventually, my mother's going to die, my grandma, everybody around. By that age, I even understood. It's like, and there's a time for that, but you can't stay there. It's a time that you have to move away. A time as well to laugh. There are appropriate cycles, and they do kind of. We try to avoid sorrow, and people who try not to weep a lot of times have some emotional problems because they can't express themselves, or it just you got to cry. Sometimes you just got to let it out. I think, guys, we're the worst because we think it's something that's a sign of weakness, and so we don't want to let people see us cry. But sorrow is a part of it that has to happen.
Yeah, I noticed that my grandson was playing, he used to play all kinds of sports when he was really little, and they never really kept score. They just said, or they never said, okay, this team beat that team. It just sort of said, I forget how they actually said it, but they didn't want to say, this team beat this other team, because they were little kids, and they said they're just having fun. But like you say, everybody has to experience sorrow at some time. And I can understand the little kids being so young, and they don't want to say, okay, this team beat that team, they're just having fun. I guess I can understand it. But I thought it was kind of weird that they didn't say, okay, this team beat that team, and then, I guess the coaches would probably say, okay, we got to do better or whatever, but they're just having fun.
Well, and that shows the opposites as well, doesn't it? There are winners, there's losers.
Yeah.
You got to learn how to lose to be a winner. My little grandson, I don't know where he got it, but he's got it.
Use the words.
Yeah, they use the word, they just say, oh, we have fun. I forget how they actually worded it.
Yeah, they won't keep score.
Yeah, they didn't want to say, okay, this team beat that team.
And that's kind of like ignoring some of these principles, isn't it?
Yeah,
Ignoring.
Kind of like why that's in a sense of what you're saying. I get what we're learning is like that's a time that they could have been taught that some win, you win some and you lose some.
Yeah.
You win, But I get what you're saying. I guess they would want to make it seem like it was a competition. They didn't want the losing team to feel like losing. They didn't want the winning team to feel like winners. Like it's kind of confusing.
Well, it's like telling somebody you can't cry at a funeral.
That's what I was getting ready to say. It's kind of like saying, well, don't cry. We don't want no one out here crying if you look like a loser. But there's a way that you can teach that without it being put on as a child being taught that you're a loser.
Right.
There's a way that you can reiterate that. But hey,
Yeah,
we
that's
don't want to
what
get
I
off
thought.
subject.
To teach you good sportsmanship,
Yeah.
You had a good game, you won.
Yeah.
Well,
Next time.
when we suffer, when we weep, and we see others then weep, we also have some compassion.
Yeah.
And we share in it in a strange way because it affects us. We know what it's like. And then when we laugh, it's contagious.
Yeah.
It's joy, it's enjoyable.
It's
And-
kind of like the same. It's saying like you say when it's a time to mourn. You know what I mean? So it's like we know when the time is to mourn. It's like when someone passes away. You know what I'm saying? But in the same sense, you have to let go. I feel sorry for people who are mourning people for 30 years.
Yeah.
I talk with people, clients, and it's like crying, my son, and I'm thinking it was something recent. Oh, he's been dead for 15 years. I'm like, 15 years? I'm like, we talking about a child that you're still crying for 15 years? Like, oh, I just can't get over it. And I'm like, you still been holding on to that for 15 years? Like, he's gone, right? Like, And not to be unsympathetic, but it's like that time for his mourning has passed. You know, I think the Bible does say the 30 days, more no more.
Well, that's what I was going to bring up. There are cultures that had limitations and designated, and some of them are interesting because, well, I'll tell you one. King Herod, when Jesus was alive, one of the things that when he came to the end of his life, Herod the Great, he's just before him, Herod the Great was so hated that when he died, he knew nobody would weep for him. And so he rounded up all the key civic leaders, and he instructed his servants to kill them, execute them all, because he wanted Jerusalem and Israel to weep on the day he died, because he knew they would not weep for him. Now, I don't know if that's the sickness, right? It's like, even he wanted, that, but they're healthy and they're necessary parts. Just like birth and death. Planting, ripping out. You got to clean the field. You got to start again, building up, tearing down. All those relationships are very necessary. You can't get away and avoid one or the other. A farmer can't leave the old crops there and just plant seed on top of it. He's got to go and rip out. Right. So all of this is so part of the natural, winning and losing. We could add a verse. There's a time to win and there's a time to lose. And it teaches you something. The biggest thing is we're not equal to God. Again, it's like trying to keep it back, that the whole concept, all of these bring back the reality that God's the only one outside of time, and he's the only one that's in charge of it all. We'll just go on. A time to mourn and a time to dance. The various cycles take us through birth, death, marriage, divorce, success, failures, all these things that happen. One moment you're rejoicing, you got a great job, and in 2 years you're weeping because you got fired. And you think it's the end of the world. That's the other thing is, almost all of these, there's a light on the end of the tunnel. And a lot of times when you're younger, you see birth, but you won't see death. You ignore those things. You plant, you see the little plant come up, but you fail to remember, I'm going to pull that plant out. You build something, and you quickly realize, oh man, I got to tear it down. And then when you tear it down, you're like, well, do I rebuild? How do I rebuild? You're so focused on the tearing down or the negative side of it as well, not knowing it's a cycle. It's a process of life. Some of these are kind of a little strange. This could be the idea of building up, storing. Again, some of this is very Hebrewic in the culture at that day and age. So embrace, time to shun in our relationships. Sometimes we have warm relationships and, you embrace those relationships, and there's times that it's done. You need to end it. Yep. We always love the hugging, the embracing of a new relationship, don't we? But man, understanding that there's also, it doesn't mean every relationship either. It's not saying every relationship's going to end with a shunning, to shun away from something, but it brings us into confrontation, rebuke, and conflict. And that's a natural part as well. A lot of times we're like on this journey, searching in quest for something. And then there's a time where it's fine, like give it up. Let it go. It's just not being willing to the possibility of the mission or whatever project you may be working on. And then there's a time you go after it. So again, time to keep, time to take away, throw away. It's not a garage sale, but I think I like the way Paul was talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, 11 and 13. He talks about the idea of whatever is valuable to our lives as a Christian. Those are the things that, we need to keep. And then there's aspects of our character and our life that is around us. We need to throw it away. We have to transition. Tear down, time to sow. Now, this is one that I think is really cultural for that time. I've never seen somebody, when somebody died, rip their clothes. You see, you read about it in the Bible that, whenever, like Hezekiah, when he found out that the Assyrians were about ready to destroy the city, or certain grief moments you read historically in the Bible where they'll rip their clothes and they go very emotional. Some scholars point that this is what it's kind of referring to. This idea of this ripping of grief and mourning and very emotional and stuff. And then there's a time that, fix it up. It's over. It's time to move on. It could also you can see there's times that, you got to cut the clothes, you got to cut something, you got to modify something, you got to repair it. They're both things that happen. This is one. Time to be silent and the time to talk. Knowing the difference is wisdom.
Yeah, it comes with time.
Wisdom, right?
Yep, it sure is.
There's times we need to voice our concerns. You need to talk. You need to be able to, people that just sit by and do nothing. I've always loved that saying. I don't know who to credit it to, that the only thing for evil to succeed is by good people to do nothing. Say nothing. And I think that's what got our country into where we're at. Because good people were saying nothing.
That's what I was like, wait a minute.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody would say nothing. They're not bothering me. They're not in my church. Well, they are now. They're in all these churches around. Not here per se. But it's like, there's a time, that we should, but there's a time that we need to speak up. There's even a role for when it comes to love and hate. And when we're talking about hate, God hates sin, okay? But that's a righteous hate. And that's the difference. This is something where you detest something that is not righteous or not correct. But there's a time that we should care for. War and peace. These are not things that Solomon is saying God has put into place, because many of these things are driven around the external events of living human beings, and it happens. In other words, God doesn't want war, but there are times where God has brought war on his own people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then there's times where God relented, said, that's enough.
Yeah.
That's enough. We see that in the cycle throughout the period of Judges, right? Where it kept going. And so he comes to the point where he said, what profit is there to the worker from that in which he told? So what do you get out of it? That's a good question, huh? A lot of trauma. All of that we just talked about, all the pleasures, all the seeking after wisdom, all the things you're doing, and then you expend your time in all of those things that happen to us in life. And when it's all over with, then you just come back to that question and you go, so what's the profit of it? Now, some could philosophically just say, well, that's our bad, because we ate the fruit of the tree and mankind went down the wrong direction. And so, but I think that's kind of narrow-sighted in a way, because God knew that was going to happen. Remember? From the beginning of time, before the foundations were laid, God had already established that his Son was going to come and he would give himself for us. And so he understood that all these things, these seasons, were going to be happening. And the effect of what time and the limitations of time was going to happen. And it should do a great service to us and cause us to go, everything here without God, it's not profit. But like he said, when we concluded last week, was that God said it's a good thing to toil. It's a good thing to work. It's something he has set us to do. And we do take pleasure in it. Even though it's hard work sometimes, some of the hardest things that we've done, when we accomplish it, we look back and it's rewarding. And it's even more so. If you don't have God, then you just got to look at the next project. You got to keep working. You got to keep seeking more pleasure. You got to keep doing these things. But that's the point of this whole book, is that anything during this life that we're experiencing without God is superficial and can't be satisfied. And so in 10 and 11, he says, I have seen the task which God has given the sons of men with which to occupy themselves. Just stop to think about that. What are you doing with your life? Well, you're living, you're dying, you're embracing, you're pushing away, you're gathering, you're scattering, we're loving, we're hating, we're warring, we're peace. All of those things are part of what he's saying. These experiences are things in which God had us do, and also to create. If you think about it, one of the greatest things he's given us is, one, he created us in his image, and he created us out of love. And so when we procreate, when we have our children, we create, we build homes, we build things, and we see, this nice, beautiful building. When the carpenters put the last nail in this building 60-something years ago, and they look back at it, they probably went, wow, that's awesome. Look at that. They enjoyed it. There was joy there. There's a part where God has given that. He has made everything, though, appropriate in its time. He has also set eternity in their heart, yet so that man will not find out the work which God has done from the beginning to the end of time. There's a certain level that God has placed everything to happen appropriately, and they're serving a purpose. I think, again, it keeps us in the perspective of God's outside of time, we're not. God's the one that's controlling the time. This is really fascinating, that God has put eternity into our hearts. And there's very, 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 very few people who believe that when they breathe their last breath in this body, that there's nothing after this. There really is. There's very, very few. They may believe in reincarnation, nirvana, something. And I think it's because God has created that in us. That's what he said. That's what he means when he says he put eternity. What's eternity? It's outside of time. But we live in time. But yet he set eternity in our hearts to know that this is time. I'm living in time. But soon, all time will finish for me. And then I go to where? Eternity. Yeah. Somewhere. Yeah. I'm not just going to be like a dog who dies, and just, that's it. And that makes us different from the animal kingdom, that we're not evolved. That shows that we're not the same. And so all the parts of life described, when you put them together, they don't equal something meaningful unless you add the part that is outside of time. If you don't include the eternal, then it's a bleak existence because your clock is ticking and it's going to stop. And so that's kind of one of the things. And so, and I think that, like what Paul says in Colossians 1:15, he says, Jesus, he is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in the heavens, on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rules or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together, all time. And so, we should we're never going to be able to understand the totality of what God's doing because he exists outside of time. And so we have that in our nature, and so we need to satisfy it. The atheists satisfy it with science. The agnostics try to walk the fence. Maybe, maybe not. And without God, then it's a miserable existence the moment from the time of our birth if we don't have something external from this physical world, and that's only the eternal. And I think that's kind of the bigger picture he keeps trying to bring up, and that's this relationship that we went through. So that's all I have for the class for tonight. Next week we'll look at part 2 of time. Hope you can make it Sunday morning at 9:45 for Bible study, and then at 10:45 for worship, 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And we'll be back here next week. Until then, God bless.